again, we were both overwhelmed.
You never saw McIntosh sitting at a computer sending any messages at any time. Isn't this true?
We didn't witness it. We were in our rooms.
Thank you.
Last question.
There are no witnesses in this courtroom, to your knowledge, who have ever made such an observation either, correct?
Not that I know of.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Okay, you're excused. Thank you. Do you have any further witnesses?
Yes.
Yes, the prosecution would like to call Detective Ashton Huff to the stand.
So cool. Or at least we're saving on payroll.
Please further.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Please further identify yourself to the court.
My name is Ashton Hoff, and I am an Albany County Sheriff Investigator.
You look very familiar.
Why? No idea. Never been here before.
What kind of crimes do you investigate, officer?
I, for the most part, investigate cyber crimes, which are any crimes that take place online or on an online forum such as a chat room.
And what experience do you have when it comes to cyber crimes?
I have a lot of experience. Before I came here, I was on the cyber crime squad in Newcastle, and in order to get certified for that, I went through an intensive training course. I also have a degree in computer science from the University of Delaware, and I also served as a computer technician for the Navy on the USS Reliant for 4 years.
At this point, Your Honor, I would like to enter Ashton Huff as an expert witness in cyber crimes and police tactics.
Do you wish to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor, there is no need for there to be any expert in cybercrime in this case.
Why not?
What's wrong?
That's what I thought. Go ahead. The witness will be deemed an expert.
You were the officer to interview the victim and witness, Jamie Gates and Casey Walner, correct?
Yes, I was the first one to talk to the girls.
And how did the victim and witness appear during the interview process?
Both of them, but especially Jamie Gates, were so nervous when they walked in. I knew that if I wanted to get any good
Objection.
information.
Speculation.
Your Honor, she was interviewing the witness. She was in the room and could see their visible reactions. And as a police officer for countless years, she would know what a nervous person looks like.
Okay, I'll allow it. Go ahead. Answer the question.
Yes, when they came in, both of them, especially Jamie Gates, was very nervous, and I knew that if I wanted to get any good information out of them, I'd have to calm them down. So
What did you see that made you think that they were nervous?
Jamie Gates, she was doing, exhibiting nervous tendencies like hand-wringing. She kept squirming in her seat. She would stand up and pace throughout the room, things that were very telling.
Now, how did you plan on carrying out your investigation?
I intended to have the girls log into the chat room and continue using it until we could track down the perpetrator.
And how did the girls react to this request?
Both of them, but again, especially Jamie, was not happy with this
Objection,
idea.
relevance. Since this process was not fulfilled, there is no necessary induction of this into the trial.
Your Honor, may I be heard? This shows how fearful the victim and her roommate were about even going back in to continue the messages that they were
I'll
receiving.
sustain the objection.
Question withdrawn. Were you able to locate the computer that sent the messages to Jamie Gates?
Yes, we were.
And were you able to identify the users who sent the messages to Jamie Gates from this computer?
Yes, the two usernames were Survive2005 and Shockwave.
And who did these accounts belong to?
They both were registered to Pat McIntosh.
Did you question Pat McIntosh about his accounts?
Of course, we have to hear both sides of the story.
And what did Pat McIntosh say?
He claimed that Survive2005,
Objection. Hearsay.
Your Honor.
I'll allow it. Go ahead.
he claimed that Survive2005 was his username from the previous year, and that he had written it down in his forensics textbook, which he had sold back to the school, and believed another student was framing him.
And did you investigate Pat McIntosh's claims?
Very thoroughly. We went to the college bookstore and looked through the books that they had there. No username and password. Went to the library to see if it had ended up there. No username and password. Talked to students in the class. No username and password.
So what would you say as a result of your investigation about Pat McIntosh's claims?
I believed that his claims were non-credible.
During your investigation, at what point did Pat McIntosh say that his current username, Shockwave, was being used by someone else?
He never claimed that.
And were you able to identify what times the messages were sent?
Yes, again, with the help of the computer technician staff at the school, we were able to find out what time the messages were being sent.
If you were able to find out who these accounts belonged to, was there any way that the school could have monitored anything happening in the chat room?
Yes, the school definitely could have. In fact, they have a filter system in place, which is meant to catch these sort of things.
If there's a monitoring system in place, why didn't the program or the computer staff see the threatening messages Ms. Gates received?
It's very common that things like this.
Objection, calls for speculation.
I agree with you.
Okay, question withdrawn. Were you able to find out more about the contents of the chat room?
Yes, I was.
And how were you able to do that?
With the help again of the computer technician staff.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what has been marked as People's Exhibits 3? I refer opposing counsel to the same numbered exhibit in the packet tendered to them at the start of the trial.
Yes.
I apologize, I believe I meant to say Exhibit 7. May I approach the
Yes.
witness?
Thank you.
Ms. Hopp, I'm showing you now this document marked as People's Exhibit 7. Would you identify this as the transcripts of the chat room during the people of...
Objection, Your Honor. The document we have labeled as Exhibit 7 is not the transcripts of the chat room.
Do you have the correct exhibit?
Your Honor, if I may, it's Exhibit 9.
It's
Exhibit 9.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Don't let it happen again.
Hold on.
Yes, I can identify this as the transcripts from the chat room.
And how do you know what it is?
I know what it is because I was there when the computer technician staff printed it out.
And is this document obtained in the ordinary course of police work?
Yes,
And are you the person who would have obtained such a document?
of course, yes.
And when did you obtain this document?
I obtained it on May 14th around 10 p.m.
Your Honor, I would like to move this document into evidence.
Do you wish to be heard?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, it's moved into evidence.
Thank you. Now,
One more minute.
may I move this document? Thank you. Now, officer, as an expert in cyber crimes and to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, can you tell the court who made postings in the chat room between May 9th and May 14th under the username Survive2005 and
Objection, Your
Shockwave?
Honor. Officer Hopp has made professional opinions about police work and police actions not being scientific.
What was your question?
Assumption.
Repeat it.
I asked if the officer, as an expert in cyber crimes, was able to say who made the postings in the chat room between May 9th and May 14th.
And your position is?
Before, Counselor said the scientific certainty, which I believe that Officer Hopp does not have.
So the question will be permitted, but without the words scientific certainty.
Yes.
You may answer the question.
Yes. After conducting all my research, I can say with certainty that Pat McIntosh was the one who left those messages in the chat room.
And as an expert in cyber crimes,
This is your last question.
as an expert in cyber crimes, after your investigation, after a review of these transcripts, can you tell us the nature of the communications posted by Survive2005 and Shockwave?
Objection, that's outside of the witness's expertise.
Say it one more time.
As an expert in cyber crimes, after your investigation and after a review of these transcripts, can you tell us the nature of the communications posted by the two usernames?
And how is that relevant to this witness?
question withdrawn, Your Honor.
Well, no, duke it out with me.
Well, the witness.
You're not getting off that easy.
The witness is an expert in cybercrimes.
In
and after an
cybercrimes.
exam-
And what does an expert in cybercrimes have an expertise in? What is the nature of the expertise?
The nature of the expertise would be analyzing various crimes and how they're committed on.
You could say that for any
spaces.
expertise. What is it specifically about this witness?
Well, being able to analyze how certain users and how the actual chat room works and how somebody would have gone about
So the
committing.
mechanical
crimes.
parts of it?
Yes.
Okay, and your question again is?
Can you tell us the nature of the communications posted by Survive 2005?
So how does the nature of the communications, right?
Yes.
How can she, who deals with the mechanical aspects of how those communications go from point A to point B, and who may have pressed buttons, how does she give an expert opinion with regard to what the message said? And now you can withdraw it.
I withdraw.
And finish torturing you. Next.
Thank you. No further questions.
Very good job, thank you.
Cross out.
Yes.
Ms. Hop, you are not present in Pat McIntosh's storms at any time between May 9th and May 14th, 2006, correct?
Nope.
And you were also not present in Jamie Gate's dorm room between May 19th or May 14th, correct?
5 more seconds. I'm just kidding.
You weren't sitting in front of a computer connected to the Big Apple State College chat room from May 9th, 2006 to May 14th, 2006, before the hours of 9 o'clock at night on the 14th either, isn't that correct?
No, but I did see a copy of the transcript afterwards.
Your Honor, move to strike the non-responsive portion, everything after the no.
Very well.
So it would be correct to say you have no first-hand knowledge of any of the events in the chat room during that point in time, correct?
Not while it was happening, but afterwards, yes.
You testified that you interviewed Jamie Gates and her roommate sometime after May 14th, isn't that correct?
On May 14th, yes.
When you interviewed Jamie Gates and Casey Warner, you testified that they appeared to be nervous, isn't that correct?
I did, yes.
You also testified that they voiced concern and fear over the so-called internet attacks that Jamie had been receiving, isn't that correct?
Yes, they were both very fearful of the entire incident.
Now, Officer Hopp, you're aware of the security measures the school has put in place, particularly in the red panic button, isn't that correct?
Yes, I am aware of it.
Isn't it true that there is no record of Jamie Gates pressing this red panic button?
No, they did not press it, but after interviewing them and seeing their fear, I can understand why they did it.
Your Honor, move to strike the non-responsive portion.
It is stricken from the record. You will restrict your testimony to matters of the nature of your expertise.
Isn't it true when someone posts something in the chat room, the only way you can identify who posted that comment is through usernames which is shown on this chat room screen, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Isn't it true that if someone else had access to given usernames or passwords, that the other person would be able to post in that chat room under that username, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's also correct.
Officer Hopp, isn't it also true that this is well known that other students' usernames and passwords are commonly written down on things in college, isn't that correct?
Objection, speculation.
Yes, I agree.
Now, officer, isn't it true that Pat McIntosh told you he wrote down his usernames and passwords on a textbook the previous year?
He did, but there was no evidence that that claim was valid.
Isn't it true that you searched for this textbook in the school library and the college's bookstore?
Yes.
You never testified that you tracked down every single textbook used in the forensic class last year, did you?
I can track down every single one, but it was a very thorough investigation.
And yet your conclusion, in spite of the knowledge that it's common practice for students to write down their usernames and passwords, despite the fact that you have not found every single textbook in that class, you concluded that my client was lying, isn't that correct?
I never testified that it was common practice for students to write down their usernames and passwords.
Okay, so not finding every single textbook in that forensic class, you conclude that my client had been lying about not writing down that username or password in the textbook, correct?
Yes.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to some specific references to Jamie Gates' activities on and or prior to May 9th. You're aware that she was exercising in her dorm room window, and it's fair to say anybody who saw Jamie Gates exercising in her window could make a comment inside the chat room about it, and your assumption.
Objection here cited that this witness doesn't know anything about Jamie Gates's actions. The only thing that she could testify to is to this nature of the cyber crimes and to the actual transcript, which she was in contact with during her investigation.
Sustained.
May I be heard?
No.
Now, isn't it true that you've testified that Pat McIntosh, withdrawn, Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you. Do the people rest?
People rest,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Thank you. Okay.
Defense calls Patsy McIntosh to the stand.
Okay. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Under oath. Have a seat. Go ahead.
Please further identify yourself to the board.
As I already said, my name is Pat McIntosh. I'm a sophomore at Big Apple State College.
And how do you know Jamie Gates?
Well, we live in the same hall together, Adirondack Hall, and I was in her freshman intro to psych and literature class.
What, if anything, unusual happened between you and Jamie in that class?
Well, so I'm considering a career in law enforcement and psychology and kind of a combination of those two. Because I think that looking at criminal behavior from a psychology perspective is something that really there needs to be a lot more work done and could potentially give us really interesting results. So I did a few extra credit assignments in that class. I did one report on, I think, Jack the Ripper or some other normal psychology cases, and she got super freaked out and she had to leave the room in this state of being extremely of distress.
What, if any, face-to-face interactions did you have with Jamie Gates?
Essentially, occasionally I bump into her in the hallways, in the hall, or in school, but the only real interaction I've ever had was around the time that I guess these chat room statements were made. I saw her in the student union with her roommate, and she saw me and she started getting really terrified, and she was playing some weird hide-and-seek game, I think, and she was dragging her roommate along with her.
You've heard the prosecution talk about a chat room, correct?
Yes.
How often do you use this chat room?
I'm not a hugely avid user. I don't use it like a social network, but I do enjoy discussing my research and different academic topics on it.
Can you tell us what your username was during your sophomore year?
During my sophomore year, my username was Shockwave,
And what was your username during your freshman year?
survived 2005.
Now let's turn your attention to the time period
Why
between
did you
May.
change the names?
I started realizing that I had written my name survived 2005 pretty much everywhere because I really cannot remember passwords, so I have to write it down in my textbooks, on my planner, sometimes on the walls in my room. So it became pretty clear that it was not a secure account, and so I had to switch. I feared that might happen again this year with Shockwave, so I've switched again.
Now let's turn your attention to the time period between May 9th and May 14th, 2006. Would it surprise you to know that on May 9th, 2006, there was a whole series of postings made by Survive 2005?
Not really. Again, I had written my password down essentially everywhere, including on my forensics textbook, which I think in the end of the year shuffle got either donated or sold to the library or the bookstore, and it's pretty easy to imagine someone picking it up, taking it with them, and discovering my account information.
Do you remember about what time or date you signed on to the chat room?
It wasn't until that Friday. I think that's May 12th or May 13th.
So you say you didn't sign on with your username until May 13th, but would it surprise you to know that there were also entries on May 12th under the username Shockwave?
Unfortunately, I've realized that I don't always log off my computer, and that kind of what I did with Survive 2005, where I would write down my password everywhere, I still do that pretty often. So people seem to have gotten access to my accounts and are starting to post under my name.
Do you recall what you specifically said on May 13th?
I know it was a pretty long discussion. I can't remember word for word what I said, but I know I was preparing for this trial. I I saw a transcript of the chat room information. If I could see that, it would really refresh my recollection.
May I approach the witness with what has been marked for identification as Defense Exhibit I?
Yes. One more minute.
Please turn to page 58.
Okay.
The message that was posted at 9:30 p.m. was by Shockwave. It says, "Jam will rot just like jelly if buried long enough." What can you say about that statement?
I never made that statement. I don't know who did. Someone must have either had access to my account or I left my computer on. I know at that time I was at an interview in the computer lab, so I definitely could not have been making a statement.
Have you ever made fun of Jamie Gates in the chat room in any shape, manner, or form?
I never made fun of her in any real creepy or stalkery way, but I mean, sometimes we like to poke fun, have a little bit of an academic discussion and conversation.
Give me an example of a time or a statement that you admit to making that would be a jest or
Well, I already told you about kind of that weird hide and seek game she
Tell me
played.
again.
What?
Tell me again.
Yeah, so as I told you, in the student union, there was this weird hide and seek game that she was playing with me. And in response to that, I think the next day in the chat room, I said, "Hey, Janet, do you want to come out of your room and play?" And so that's an example of kind of a jest that we made.
And have you ever threatened Jamie Gates in any shape, manner, or form?
No, why would I do that?
No further questions, and may I retrieve the document now?
Yes, thank you. Would you like to cross-examine
Yes.
the witness?
Mr. McIntosh, you've used the Big Apple State College withdrawn. Mr. McIntosh, you've used the chat room at Big Apple State College, is that not right? Is that right?
That's true.
And when you sign into the chat room, you have to choose at some point in college your username and password.
Yeah.
Could you please tell us what your username and password were during the 2004-2005 scholastic year?
That was my freshman year, so survived 2005.
And your password was King Crab, wasn't it?
Could have been. I can't tell you what any of my passwords are right now.
Now, to your knowledge, no one else had withdrawn. Now, you testified a few moments ago on direct that you wrote this screen name, your name, this screen name, and your password down on a textbook. Is that not right?
Among other places.
And isn't it also true that you told Ashton Hopp that you had written that down on your forensic textbook?
Yeah, I think so.
Now, it is your testimony that you wrote these username and password down on your forensics textbook and you sold it.
Sure, yeah.
That you took this course during the spring of 2006.
I believe it was 2005.
2000.
I was in my freshman year when I took the forensics course, I think, so it must have been 2005. I remember kind of losing it, either donating or selling it at the end of my freshman year.
Withdrawn. So it is your testimony that at the end of your semester in May or June, you got rid of that textbook and you have no recollection of who you sold it to, when, or any details of that sale.
Objection, compound question.
I'll allow the question.
Can you repeat the question?
It is your testimony that in May or June, when you got rid of that textbook, you have no recollection of who you sold it to, or anything, or any other detail of that sale.
I mean, I know I got rid of it and it probably wound up in the library or the campus bookstore, but other than that, I have no recollection.
When you sold the book, did you get paid for it?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
I'll have a question.
I think so. It's possible I donated it to the library. Can't really remember. Again, the end of freshman year was kind of a mess on moving out day.
So,
Next question.
yes. Do you remember the person who you sold it to?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
It goes to his credibility.
I'll have it.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Do you remember the person you sold it or donated it to?
As I already said, I do not remember the person that I sold or donated it to.
Do you remember how you got paid for it?
But money, I would assume, but I don't understand what you mean.
With cash?
Oh, no memory.
Okay.
Asked and answered.
Thank you. Well done.
So, you remember writing your name, your username and password down on a book. You remember selling that book.
So when I say well done, I mean it.
Oh, I'm stupid. Okay, great.
No, good job, good job. Okay, good, you're done. Thank you so much. Okay. One of the joys of being a judge is we get to torture the lawyers. So, doesn't mean you didn't do well. Okay, all right. Next witness?
The defense calls Jesse Flicker to the stand. Jesse Flicker.
How are you? Would you raise your right hand? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, you're under oath. Have a seat.
Please further identify yourself to the court.
As I just said, my name is Jesse Clifford, and I'm a technology webmaster and cyber angel at Big Apple State College.
What does a webmaster and cyber angel do?
Well, it was my responsibility to design the college's chat room and way of communication for the students.
So we heard a lot about these chat rooms from prosecution's side. What safeguards are there in place to protect the students in the chat room?
First, there is a filter, which is to red flag any phrases and words and phrases that might make it, that are threatening phrases and words.
Is there anything else?
Next, there's a faculty and staff member observing the chat room, and they rotate, so they can observe it, and if they find something that's threatening, they can take care of it.
Is there any other safeguard in place?
There is a red panic button, so if everything else fails, if you feel threatened, you could press that button.
I'd like to turn your attention to 4:45 to 5:30 p.m. on May 9, 2006. Did any messages sent ever get flagged by the filter?
No.
On that same day, between those same times, did username Jamin at BASC ever push the red panic button?
No.
On that same day, same times, did anybody push the red panic button?
No.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to Thursday, May 12, 2006, between the times of 3:18 p.m. and approximately 3:33 p.m. Were any messages that were sent in the chat room on that day flagged?
Nope.
Did username Jamin at BASC ever push the red panic button then?
Nope.
Did anybody press the red panic button on that day?
Nope.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to May 13, 2006, between the hours of 2:30 p.m. and 3:40 p.m. Were any messages sent in the chat room flagged by the filter on that day?
No.
Did username Jamin at BASC press the red panic button on May 13, 2006?
No.
Did anybody press the red panic button on May 13, 2006?
No.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to Saturday, May 14th, between the hours of 9:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. Did any messages sent at all during that day ever get flagged by the filter?
No.
Did username Jamin at BASC ever push the panic button on that day?
No.
And no one pressed the panic button at all that day either?
No.
did username jammin@BASC ever push the red panic button between any of those dates?
No.
So, switching to that, what were you doing on Saturday, May 14th at 8:15 p.m. 2006?
Your Honor, relevance of what this person was doing at this time?
The witness has confirmation that Pat McIntosh was not at a computer.
Okay,
Okay, so what were you doing on that day?
Pat McIntosh was interviewing me on this topic of combating terrorism over the internet.
Was he near a computer screen?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
thank you.
Cross-examination, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
So, didn't you say yourself that the filter system and the teaching staff sometimes does not pick up statements that may have been taken out of context because they couldn't have been taken out of context? So,
Objection outside the scope of the direct.
I would agree.
you testified that you were the designer of the college chat room, that's correct?
Yes.
And you set up the chat room so that students could use it with the username and password, is that right?
Yes.
And did students have to agree before using the chat room not to use any offensive language, post any sexual content, or harass any other students?
They do that every time. So every time they log in, they have to click I accept these terms, and then they can use the chat room properly.
Thank you. So in the chat room registration form as well, students were warned that any of the aforementioned behaviors would not be tolerated, correct?
Yes.
Now, these students had to sign off that they understood these warnings, or they wouldn't have access to the chat room, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
Withdrawn, Your Honor. And Pat McIntosh registered and chose a username and password after signing said documents, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness
Go
with
ahead.
what is in evidence as Exhibit 9, the transcript? You recognize this transcript as a printout from the chat room for the period May 9th through May 14th. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you tell us who chose the screen name Jammin at BASC?
Jamie Gates.
Now, can you tell us who was registered to the username Survive 2005?
Pat McIntosh.
And would you take a look at approximately 5:11 p.m. on May 9th, 2006, where Jammin at BASC said, "I'm going out now to get some PM sunshine and exercise." Do you see that?
Objection, beyond the scope of the direct.
On page
Hold on.
53.
Wait, he's objecting.
Sorry.
Objection, outside the scope of the direct.
Well, this is going to his whole job as webmaster and cyber angel.
Go
The
ahead.
direct was on his job as such position.
Good answer. Go ahead.
Can you confirm what page you were?
Page 53, it should be at around timestamp